All right, Psalm 135, let's call this one above all, vindicate. Two separate phrases that are both going to come up in this psalm, but in different points. I've connected them because the thought seems to be, once again, God is above all, but not for any vain purpose, for the purpose of reminding his people that even though you may be working in a difficult situation now, it is not vain to ask him to vindicate you in that situation because he stands above any power that may seem to be making your life miserable right now. Understanding that this is another bookend psalm that starts and ends with praise, it is also a psalm that can in some ways point backwards and forwards because it's going to talk about the idols of the nations. In some ways it points backwards to Psalm 115 and likewise forwards to some of the phrases of the passages in Isaiah that talk about the folly of idolatry. But it likewise points forward to Psalm 136 because it's going to talk about the way in which God deals with oppressive nations or oppressive regimes in this psalm that is really going to, in my reading, at least at this point, hinge upon that whole concept or plea of vindication that we find roughly in verses 13 and 14, where it reads, "Your name, O Lord, endures forever. Your renown, O Lord, throughout all ages. For the Lord will vindicate his people and have compassion on his servants," which all really matters because back in verse 5, he talks about the way in which, as we've entitled this one, the Lord sits above all, as he will go on in verses 6 through 12 to talk about three things specifically that he sits above. Once again, creation. We've seen a number of psalms that talk about the way he sits above creation, things that are clearly outside of our power to control. He considers almost as nothing. Likewise, powers. He's going to talk about the way in which God struck down the firstborn in Egypt as an example of the way he sits above human powers as well. Likewise, as Israel was freed from Egyptian captivity and moved forward into their promised land, there were some adversaries that they shouldn't have had to deal with who rose up to oppose them needlessly. And God likewise overcame those adversaries. And that reminded me of this simple fact. There are some necessary obstacles that we have in life. And this psalm, in mentioning Egypt, is reminding us that the necessary obstacles, God is bigger than those. Likewise, there are some unnecessary hurdles in life that can kind of cause you to throw up your hands and be like, this too? Really? Why? It seems like I've already gone through enough. But likewise, God is larger than the unnecessary drama that can from time to time likewise cause us needless anxiety. And that likewise reminds me of one of the first things that Jesus said in his first recorded sermon in Matthew, the Sermon on the Mount, kind of towards, I guess, the middle. He talks about anxiety and not being anxious. And so this is one of those Psalms that, going beyond that simple command to not be anxious, he gives a deeper reminder to his people, Israel, of the ways in which he has historically delivered them from the elements, from the powers that intimidated them, and the unnecessary challenges that just kind of arose in life to give them a deeper understanding of the reason why Jesus said things like, try not to be anxious. And so to the degree that we have forgotten the times in life when God has gotten us through our anxieties, our anxious moments, because the problems that are in front of us are large enough to make us forget, my prayer for you is my prayer for me, that Psalms like Psalm 135 will remind us why it's important to maintain our integrity as we ask God to vindicate us from those who misuse their power and likewise vindicate us from the misguided ideals, or better yet, idols to which they would have us conform.